Lieutenant Jake Thompson woke up with his head pounding like a hammer hitting metal. Blood filled his mouth, and everything looked blurry at first. When his eyes finally worked right, he saw strange crystal walls all around him. The walls glowed with a scary blue light that made everything look like a bad dream. This wasn't the battlefield anymore. Jake remembered the last fight at Kepler Station. His soldiers had fought hard against the bug-like aliens called the Vex. They had tried their best, but the Vex were too strong. Now Jake was far away from that burning planet where his friends had died. The bug aliens had grabbed him after the fight. Jake could still hear their weird clicking sounds in his head. They seemed happy about catching a human officer. The Vex thought they had won a big prize, but they had no idea what kind of mistake they were about to make. Jake tried to sit up, but his whole body hurt. His uniform was torn and dirty. There was dried blood on his hands and face. The crystal cell was bigger than he expected, but it felt cold and empty. Strange symbols covered the walls, glowing softly in the weird light. Then Jake heard something move in the dark corner of the cell. At first, he thought maybe it was just his imagination, but then two huge golden eyes opened. Up in the darkness, each eye was as big as a dinner plate. Jake's heart started beating fast. A deep, scary sound came from the shadows. It sounded like rocks grinding together underground. Whatever was making that noise was really big. Jake could feel the floor shake a little bit every time the thing moved. Slowly, a massive creature stepped into the blue light. Jake had never seen anything like it in his whole life. The thing looked like a dragon from old Earth stories, but much more real and frightening. Its skin was covered in scales that changed color from deep purple to black as it moved. Even though the creature was bent over, it was still almost 12 feet tall. The dragon's head was enormous, with sharp teeth showing when it spoke. Its claws scraped against the crystal floor, making an awful scratching sound. Long, powerful arms ended in hands that could probably crush a man's head like an egg. "Great, another toy for the Vex to play with," the dragon said. Its voice was so deep that Jake could feel it in his chest. "I was hoping for something more interesting after being stuck in here for 40 long years." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. This thing could talk like a person, but it sounded angry and tired. 40 years in prison would make anyone feel that way. Fighting through the pain in his ribs, Jake slowly stood up. He didn't want to look weak in front of this dangerous creature. His legs felt wobbly, but he managed to stay standing. "Did you say 40 years?" Jake asked. His voice came out rougher than he wanted. "What exactly are you?" The dragon looked at him with those big golden eyes. There was something sad and proud in the way it stared at Jake, like it was remembering better times from long ago. "I am Draven from the Fire Courts," the creature said with pride in its voice. "I used to be a prince of the great Drakmor Empire. Now I'm the last one left alive." Draven moved closer to Jake, and the human could feel heat coming from the dragon's body. "And you, small human, just became my roommate. We'll be stuck together until the Vex get bored and decide to kill us both." Jake looked around their crystal prison again. Something told him this was just the beginning of a very strange adventure. 3 whole days went by without much talking between Jake and Draven. The silence felt heavy and uncomfortable, like waiting for a storm to hit. Jake spent most of his time walking around their crystal prison, looking at every corner and wall. He touched the strange surfaces and studied the glowing patterns that covered everything. Draven just sat in his corner, watching Jake like a big cat watches a mouse. Those golden eyes followed every move Jake made. Sometimes Jake could feel the dragon staring at him, even when he wasn't looking back. It made his skin crawl, but he tried not to show how nervous he felt. The walls of their cell weren't just pretty decorations. Jake noticed that complicated patterns and symbols were carved deep into every surface. Some of the markings were tiny, while others were as big as his hand. They all connected to each other in ways that seemed important, like they were trying to tell a story. Jake had always been good at noticing details. That's what made him a good archaeologist. Before the war started, he would spend hours looking at old ruins and broken pieces of ancient civilizations, trying to figure out what they meant. Now, as he studied these crystal walls, something felt very familiar. "Wait a minute," Jake said quietly to himself. He got down on his knees to look closer at some symbols near the floor. His fingers traced along the carved lines, feeling their smooth edges. The more he looked, the more excited he became. "These aren't Vex markings," Jake said out loud, his voice echoing in the crystal chamber. He was talking to himself, but heard every word. The massive dragon's head turned toward Jake so fast it was almost scary. Those golden eyes were suddenly very focused and alert. For the first time since Jake had been thrown into the cell, Draven looked truly interested in something. "You can actually read the old writing?" Draven asked. His deep voice sounded surprised, and maybe a little hopeful. Jake stood up and brushed the dust off his torn uniform. He felt excited for the first time in days. This was like finding treasure in an old dig site back on Earth. "Some of it, yes," Jake replied. "I should tell you something important about myself. I'm not just a regular soldier who carries a gun and follows orders. Before this terrible war started, I was an archaeologist. Actually, Dr. Jake Thompson, if we're being formal about it." Jake walked over to another section of the wall, where bigger symbols were carved. He pointed at them with his finger, tracing their shapes in the air. "I've seen patterns just like these before," Jake continued. "There were ruins on Earth that had almost identical markings. We found them buried under tons of dirt and rock. Some were in caves that hadn't been opened for thousands of years." Draven's expression changed completely. The bored, tired look disappeared from his face. Now he looked shocked, like Jake had just told him the impossible. The dragon pushed himself up and moved closer to where Jake was standing. "That can't be true," Draven said, but his voice wasn't as certain as his words. "The Vex destroyed everything from the ancient times. They made sure no record survived. They burned entire worlds to erase the old history." Jake shook his head and kept studying the symbols. His excitement was growing by the minute. This was the kind of discovery that archaeologists dream about their whole lives. "They didn't get everything," Jake said with confidence. "We humans are really good at hiding things. We found evidence of old contact between different species. There were trade routes that connected distant worlds. We even found pieces of technology that didn't come from Earth." Jake paused and looked directly at Draven. The dragon was hanging on every word now. "Humans and Drakmor worked together thousands of years ago," Jake said. "We were partners, maybe even friends." Draven's eyes went wide. He whispered something so quietly that Jake almost couldn't hear it. "The Forgotten Alliance," Draven breathed. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about it when I was young, but I always thought they were just legends, just old tales to make children dream of better times." Jake smiled for the first time since being captured. "It was real, Draven, very real." Then Jake looked around their prison with new understanding. His archaeological training was telling him something incredible. "And if I'm reading these symbols correctly," Jake said slowly, "this isn't actually a prison cell at all. This is a command bridge." Over the next week, Jake and Draven worked together like they had been partners for years. Jake spent hours every day studying the ancient writing on the walls, while Draven shared old stories that his family had passed down through generations. It was amazing how much the dragon remembered from tales his grandfather used to tell him as a child. The more they learned, the more incredible their discovery became. This massive ship they were trapped on wasn't built by the Vex at all. It was originally a Drakmor vessel from hundreds of years ago. The bug aliens had captured it during one of their many wars, and changed it to fit their own needs. But they had been lazy about it, just building their own stuff on top of the original design. Jake found this discovery absolutely fascinating. It was like finding an ancient castle that someone had turned into a modern house. But all the old secret passages were still hidden behind the new walls. The Vex had no idea what they were really flying around in. "Look at this," Jake said excitedly, pointing to a group of symbols carved near what looked like some kind of control panel. The markings were much clearer now that he understood more of the ancient language. "These are emergency protocols. Instructions for what to do if the ship gets in trouble." Draven moved his massive body closer to see what Jake was pointing at. The dragon's hot breath made Jake's neck warm, but he didn't mind. They were finally getting somewhere important. "The original Drakmor systems are still here," Jake continued, his voice getting more excited with each word. "They're just buried underneath all the Vex changes and modifications. It's like the heart of this ship is still beating, even though the Vex painted over everything else." Draven's golden eyes grew wider as he understood what Jake was saying. "Are you telling me that we might be able to take control of this entire ship?" Jake nodded, but his expression was serious. "Maybe we can, but it won't be easy. We would need to turn on all the old Drakmor systems at exactly the same time. It's like trying to start a really complicated machine where everything has to work perfectly together. The best part is," Jake added with a small grin, "the Vex probably have no idea these old systems even exist. They've been flying around in a ship they don't really understand for centuries." Draven thought about this for a moment. Then he asked the question that Jake knew was coming. "But then what happens, human? Let's say we somehow manage to escape from this cell. We're still stuck on a ship full of Vex soldiers who want to kill us. There could be hundreds of them out there." Jake's smile became more determined, and maybe a little dangerous. "Then we show the entire galaxy what humans and Drakmor can do when they work together. But first, we need to get into their computer database. I need to check something important." "What kind of something?" Draven asked. Jake stood up and started pacing around their cell. His mind was working fast, putting together pieces of a puzzle that was bigger than either of them had imagined. "I've been thinking about the war," Jake said. "The Vex haven't been attacking human colonies randomly, like everyone thought. There's a pattern to their attacks, but nobody on Earth could figure out what it was." Jake stopped pacing and looked directly at Draven. "Now I think I know. They're not just trying to conquer us. They're following the old Alliance maps from thousands of years ago. Every human world they've attacked had ruins or artifacts from when humans and Drakmor worked together." The dragon's expression changed as he understood what Jake was saying. It was like watching someone solve a mystery that had been bothering them for years. "They're scared," Draven said slowly. "The Vex are afraid of what might happen if humans and Drakmor become allies again." "Exactly," Jake replied. "They're not trying to win a war. They're trying to prevent the old Alliance from coming back. They know that together, we're stronger than they are." Jake looked around their crystal prison with new determination. "Which means, we're not just planning an escape anymore. We're about to start a revolution." Jake had been counting the hours and watching the patterns of guard movements outside their cell. After days of careful observation, he figured out when the Vex ship went into its quiet period, like nighttime on a planet. That's when they would have the best chance to escape without being noticed right away. "It's time," Jake whispered to Draven. The dragon had been waiting patiently, coiled like a spring ready to explode into action, working together. They began touching the ancient symbols on the walls in a specific order that Jake had figured out from studying the old Drakmor writing. It was like entering a secret code that had been waiting for centuries to be used again. Jake's hands moved quickly from one symbol to another, while Draven used his claws to activate the larger controls. Suddenly, the crystal walls around them started to shimmer and fade away like they were made of smoke. The ancient Drakmor systems were waking up after sleeping for hundreds of years, and they were overriding all the Vex security that had been built on top of them. Loud alarms immediately started blaring throughout the entire ship. Red lights flashed everywhere, and Jake could hear the chittering voices of confused Vex soldiers echoing through the corridors. They had no idea what was happening to their own vessel. "Move fast," Jake yelled as they ran out of what used to be their prison cell. The first group of Vex soldiers came rushing around the corner, their bug-like bodies clicking against the metal floor. They were carrying energy weapons and making angry, chittering sounds, but they weren't prepared for what hit them. Draven was like a force of nature unleashed after 40 years of being caged. His massive claws swept through the Vex soldiers like they were made of paper. But this wasn't just wild animal fury. Jake was shouting directions, telling Draven exactly where to attack and when to move. Human tactical thinking combined with Drakmor's strength was absolutely devastating. "Left! Cogido!" Jake shouted, pointing the way toward the ship's central command center. 3 more coming from behind that wall. Draven spun around and breathed a stream of fire that turned the metal wall red hot. When the Vex soldiers tried to come through, they walked right into the trap Jake had planned. They fought their way through corridor after corridor, leaving destroyed Vex soldiers behind them. Jake's military training helped him read the ship's layout, while Draven's raw power cleared the path ahead. They moved like they had been fighting together for years, instead of just 1 week. Finally, they reached the massive doors of the ship's central command center. This was where all the important information was stored, where the Vex kept their most valuable data, the database. Jake shouted over the noise of alarms and distant explosions, "I need to get into their computer system." His fingers moved incredibly fast over both the human-style controls and the ancient Drakmor interfaces that were now coming back to life. Jake's archaeological knowledge helped him understand the old systems, while his military training let him hack into the newer Vex. Technology.information started flooding across the screens faster than Jake could read it all. But what he saw made his heart stop beating for a moment. His face went pale, and his hands started shaking. "Oh no," he whispered, scrolling through file after file of terrible information. "This is so much worse than we thought." Behind him, Draven was still fighting off Vex soldiers, who kept trying to break into the command center. The dragon roared with fury as he breathed fire at 3 more enemies, turning them into ash instantly. "They've been hunting our people for generations," Jake said, his voice filled with horror and anger. "Every single human colony that got attacked, every Drakmor world that was destroyed, they all had one thing in common. They all had old ruins or artifacts from when humans and Drakmor were allies." Draven heard this news and his rage became even more intense. "Those monsters have been committing genocide," he roared. "They've been killing entire planets just to prevent our peoples from finding each other again." But then Jake found something that made him smile, despite all the terrible news. "Wait," he said, pulling up star maps and coordinates. "They made a mistake. There are others still out there, hidden human colonies that nobody knows about. Lost Drakmor clans that survived by staying hidden." Jake's smile grew bigger as he downloaded all the location data. "The Vex missed some of us, Draven, and now we know exactly where to find our people." With the Vex command center under their control, Jake and Draven had access to the most powerful communication system in the galaxy. Jake's fingers worked frantically over the controls, uploading all the historical records they had discovered. Every piece of evidence about the ancient human Drakmor alliance was about to be broadcast to every world that could receive the signal. "This is it," Jake said, his hand hovering over the final activation button. "Once we send this out, there's no going back. The whole galaxy will know the truth." Draven stood beside him, his massive form casting shadows across the control panels. "Then let them know. My people have been hiding in shame for too long. It's time they remembered who they really are." Jake pressed the button, and information began flooding out across space faster than light itself. The suppressed history of cooperation between humans and Drakmor spread to hundreds of worlds within minutes. Ancient records, star maps, and proof of shared technology reached every corner of the galaxy. The reaction was immediate and explosive. On planet after planet, people who had believed Vex propaganda for generations suddenly learned they had been lied to. The bug aliens hadn't been protecting the galaxy from dangerous species. They had been preventing the most powerful alliance in history from reuniting. Jake watched the communication channels light up with messages from dozens of worlds. Resistance groups that had been fighting hopeless battles suddenly had new energy. Colonial governors who had surrendered to the Vex started organizing uprisings. The truth was spreading like wildfire, and nothing could stop it now. "Look at this," Jake said excitedly, pointing to incoming signals from across the galaxy. 17 different worlds have started fighting back just in the last hour. The Vex are losing control everywhere. The most amazing messages started coming from places Jake and Draven thought were empty space. Hidden colonies that had stayed secret for generations were finally revealing themselves. Drakmor clans that everyone thought were extinct were sending signals from asteroid bases and hidden planets. Draven's eyes filled with tears as he heard voices speaking his ancient language for the first time in 40 years. "The fire courts still exist," he whispered in amazement. "My cousin Tyler leads the survivors on the hidden world of Arrows. My people remember the old promises, even though they thought the alliance was just a legend." Jake was equally busy coordinating with human resistance cells scattered across known space. His archaeological training became incredibly valuable as he used his knowledge of ancient sites to guide people to supply caches and weapons depots that their ancestors had hidden thousands of years ago. "The old Alliance bases are still there," Jake reported, reading incoming messages from human fighters. "Our ancestors were smart. They hid backup supplies and communication equipment in places the Vex never thought to look." Within days, something incredible began happening across the galaxy. Ships that hadn't flown together in centuries were joining up into combined fleets. Human vessels with their sleek designs flew alongside massive Drakmor warships that breathed fire and space. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying. Standing on the bridge of their captured Vex dreadnought, Jake watched as more and more allied ships appeared on their sensors. Each new arrival made their growing fleet stronger. The hidden colonies and secret clans were coming together for the first time in thousands of years. "We're not just trying to survive anymore," Jake said quietly. Watching the display screens show friendly ships gathering from every direction, Draven's deep laugh rumbled through the entire bridge, a sound of pure joy and satisfaction. "No, my human friend, we're taking back what was always ours." The Vex were terrified of what humans and Drakmor could accomplish together. Now they're about to find out exactly why they should have been afraid. The war that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The reunited alliance didn't just fight with superior technology and tactics. They fought with the fury of people who had discovered they had been lied to and manipulated for generations. Every battle brought more worlds to their cause. Jake became the first human ambassador to the reformed Drakmor fire courts, while Draven was named Prince Commander of the Joint Fleet. Together, they led the charge that swept across Vex-controlled space like an unstoppable storm. 3 months after their escape from the Crystal Prison, Jake received a final message from the Vex homeworld. The proud insect race that had controlled the galaxy for centuries was begging for mercy. Their empire was crumbling as world after world joined the renewed alliance. "We surrender," the message said simply. "Please, show mercy to our people." Jake looked at Draven, and both of them smiled. The forgotten alliance had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The age of fear was over, and the age of cooperation had begun once more.